from Vermont.
Mr. President, at some point soon, I presume, the Senate is going to adjourn for the Memorial Day week break. And I just wanted to say a few words on some of the important issues that we are now confronting. I suspect later today there will be a vote on the TPP. I suspect that those who are for the TPP have the votes, the 60 votes necessary to pass it. I know there are a number of amendments that are going to be offered, and I will support the strongest of those amendments. But the bottom line is, in my view, that the TPP is a continuation of failed trade policy, which has resulted in the loss of millions of decent-paying jobs in this country, which has resulted in the loss of tens of thousands of manufacturing facilities as corporations have shut down in America and moved to China, to Mexico, and to other low-wage countries. In my view, it is wrong to ask American workers to compete against people in Vietnam, where the minimum wage is 56 cents an hour, to compete against people in Malaysia, where in some cases you literally have indentured servitude, people who have lost their ability to leave the country and are working for incredibly low wages and horrendous working conditions. That is not what a trade policy should be. So I would hope that our colleagues in the House have more resolve than we have had here in the Senate, and I hope that they stand up and say enough is enough. Current trade policies have failed. We need trade policies that work for the average American and not just for the multinational corporations. Mr. President, I also want to say a word on another issue that I know is of deep concern in the state of Vermont, and I am quite confident is of concern in 49 other states as well. And that is that right now, in a competitive global economy, we have hundreds of thousands of bright young people who want to go to college, who want to get a higher education, but today are unable to afford that higher education. So here we are, desperately needing to have the best educated workforce in the world so that we can compete effectively. And what we are saying to our bright young people is, sorry, you are not going to be able to get the education that you need in order to get the high-quality jobs that are available in this country. And what we are saying to hundreds of thousands of those young people, no, you're not going to be doctors, you're not going to be nurses, you're not going to be scientists, you're not going to become teachers, you are not going to be able to become employees in high-tech companies because you just don't have the education. Frankly, I think that that is absolutely absurd, not only for the dreams of low and moderate income young people who want to make it into the middle class, but it is absurd if we are talking about the future of this country having a strong economy. 30 years ago, the United States led the world in terms of the percentage of our young people who had a college degree. Today, we are in 12th place. We are in 12th place. And we are competing against countries all over the world who understand the importance of their young people getting the education that is needed in this day and age. Mr. President, we are also facing a related problem in that we have millions of people, many of whom are no longer young, who are dealing with incredibly oppressive and large student debt. The average graduate now of a four-year college is approximately $29,000 in debt. That's the average. So there are many more who are graduating $40,000 or $50,000 in debt. If you go to graduate school, that number goes much higher. I recall speaking some months ago to a young woman in Burlington, Vermont, whose crime was that she went to medical school and is now practicing primary health care among low-income people, which is exactly what we need to see happening in this country. And yet she is saddled with a $300,000 debt. I talked to dentists who are also practicing in community health centers where we need them. We have a major dental crisis in this country, and they are saddled with a $250,000 debt. Now, what is absurd about the current student debt situation is that at a time when you can go out and get an auto loan for 1% or 2%, millions of our young and middle-aged people are paying interest rates on their student debt of 4, 5, 6, 7%, even higher than that. So how does it happen that you can go out and get an auto loan for 1 or 2%? How does it happen that you can refinance your home mortgage to take advantage of low interest rates, and yet you are stuck with a 5, 6, 7% interest rate on your student loan? Makes no sense to me at all. The other part of that, Mr. President, is that over a 10-year period, the federal government now makes over $80 billion in profits from student loans. Now, frankly, I'd rather see the federal government make that money than the private banks, but in fact, the federal government should not be profiting off of the loans that were needed by low and moderate income students and their families. That is not a way to make money. So what I have done, Mr. President, is introduce legislation called the College for All legislation, and it's a very simple piece of legislation. What it says is that, number one, we are going to make in this country tuition-free college for all public colleges and public universities in America, tuition-free. And we're going to do that by establishing a matching grant program of 2 to 1 from the federal government, $1 for the state. And when we do that, it will mean that every qualified young person in this country who wants to get a higher education will be able to go to their state colleges, their state university, and do it tuition-free. Now, is that an expensive proposition? It is an expensive proposition. But I think long-term, by having a well-educated society, by allowing young people today who cannot afford to go to college get that education, from an economic point of view, we will gain significantly by this legislation. And this legislation is also paid for in a fair and progressive way. It says to the people on Wall Street who have made huge, huge sums of money by speculating in a whole lot of arcane and dangerous financial tools, that we are going to establish in this country a tax on stock transfer, a transfer stock fee of 0.5%. And that will raise more than enough money to provide a tuition-free education in our public colleges and universities. So, Mr. President, this is an issue that I am going to pursue. I think it is important if we want to deal with income inequality, if we want to make sure that everybody in this country gets the education that they need, regardless of the income of their families. And there's another issue that I want to very briefly touch on as well today, Mr. President. And that deals with the whole issue of the USA Patriot Act and FISA and civil liberties in this country. And let me just make a few basic points. There is nobody in the Senate, there is nobody in the House who does not understand that there are terrorist groups out there who want to attack the United States of America and our allies, who want to do us harm. And there's nobody in the Senate or in the House or I think in the United States of America who does not believe that as a nation we have got to do everything that we can to protect the people of our country from terrorist attacks. There is no debate on that. But what the debate is about is how do we protect the American people without undermining the Constitution of the United States of America or undermining the privacy rights of the American people. Mr. President, I think everybody does understand and should understand that modern technology in all of its forms, from the iPhones to a dozen or 100 different ways, that technology has greatly outstripped public policy in terms of protecting privacy rights. By and large, the privacy rights that we have on the books now were written years and years before the development of the technologies that we see right now. And it is absolutely imperative that as a nation we begin a serious conversation, which includes some of the most knowledgeable people in this country, people who know about what technology can do today, what it can do tomorrow, people who are concerned about civil liberties and privacy rights, our law enforcement officials, our national security people, and members of the United States Congress. And what that discussion should be about is pretty simple. How do we protect our country against terrorism at the same time as we protect our privacy rights and our constitutional freedoms? Mr. President, as we consider whether or not to reauthorize parts of the Patriot Act, we must take stock of where we are today. It is no secret that NSA collects vast sums of information and at one point or another has collected information on virtually every person in this country who uses a telephone. That is no great secret. Since June 2013, we have learned that the NSA collects phone call metadata, including the numbers of both parties, location, time, and duration, text messages, email, chat, and internet browsing history, smartphone app data, including Google Maps, which can pinpoint a person's location to within a few yards, maps of people's social networks, bank and credit card transactions. And this, Mr. President, is just the tip of the iceberg. There is undoubtedly much more being done that we simply don't know anything about. Further, local governments and other agencies are also collecting information about the movements and the habits of law-abiding Americans. When you drive down the street, there are cameras that can take pictures of your license plate. There are cameras on street corners, cameras in private buildings. The government knows where you are traveling and how long you are gone. Let's be clear. While today we are focusing appropriately on the role of the federal government in issues of civil liberties, we must also understand that it is not just the government that is collecting information on law-abiding Americans. In fact, the private sector's collection of information is just as intrusive and equally dangerous. Mr. President, private companies, private corporations know a whole lot about what we do. Our every move can be tracked by a smartphone. Almost two-thirds of the American people, by the way, have smartphones. Mr. President, private companies can know what we read what we are emailing about, what websites we visit. They know when you have purchased a ticket and know where that trip is taking you. They know whether you're going on a plane or a train or a bus or wherever. Mr. President, when we go to a grocery store, your discount card gets scanned, and the grocery store knows exactly what you are eating. Same thing at the pharmacy. They know what kind of medicine you are buying, enabling people to make judgments about your health. They know when you are pregnant based on your purchases. In the name of fitness, people are wearing watches and Fitbits that record your heart rate, your exercise patterns, and how much you sleep. In the wrong information, in the wrong hands, this information could prevent people from getting health insurance through their jobs and could even prevent them from getting hired in the first place. In other words, enormous, undreamed of amounts of information are out there, and in the wrong hands, they could be a real danger to our country and to the lives of millions of innocent people. Mr. President, this is what the attack on privacy looks like. Someone can access your phone calls. They can access your credit card records. They can comb through your purchases. They can analyze your spending habits. They can access your emails and your contacts. They can track your movements. Pretty much anything and everything that we do these days can be tracked and recorded. Now, I hear many of my colleagues coming to the floor of the Senate, and they talk about America being a free country. Well, if somebody knows everything you are doing, maybe it is time to recognize that we are not quite so free as we think we are. And I know that the argument that I'm raising, people will say, well, trust these large corporations, trust the government. They're honest people, and by and large, many of them are. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But in terms of government policy, let us not forget that 45 years ago, we had a president of the United States named Richard Nixon. And what Richard Nixon believed is that anything the president of the United States does, by definition, is legal. You could break into your opponent's political headquarters, not a problem. He's the president. You could spy on people, not a problem. He's the president. So I would ask my colleagues and the American people, and I do not suggest this for 1 second that this is true of the Obama administration, but I do ask the American people to think what happens in the future if you have a president who really does believe that he or she is the law, that he or she can or should have access to the kinds of information that is out there. Think the incredible power that administration has, the potential for blackmail, the political advantages that administration has. And people say, well, it's a pretty crazy idea, never going to happen. Well, a lot of things have happened that we never thought could happen. So, Mr. President, it seems to me that now is the time for us as a nation, for us as elected officials, to have a very, very important conversation about how we balance our need, of which there is no debate, to protect the American people against terrorist attacks, while at the same time we respect the privacy rights and the constitutional rights of our people, and how we maintain America as a free and open society. I got involved in this issue a number of years ago when I voted against the USA Patriot Act, and I remember some librarians in the state of Vermont came to me and they said, you know, as a result of Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act, law enforcement officials, the FBI, can come to a librarian and demand that that librarian provide information about the books that people are borrowing from a library. And of course, Section 215 goes a lot further than that. Mr. President, do we want to be a nation in which we are looking over our shoulders and worrying about the books that we are reading, because somebody will say, oh, you're reading a book about Osama bin Laden, clearly you must be a terrorist? Is that really the kind of fear that we want to see established in this country? So I say to my colleagues, it is great to come to the floor and talk about freedom, but what freedom is about ultimately is the right of people to do what they want to do in a law-abiding way without harming other people. That's called freedom. And in my view, people have a right to make a telephone call today without that information being collected by the government. People have a right to go to the internet, to send an email with the absolute assurance as law-abiding citizens that their visits to a website or the emails they send will not be tracked by the government. People have a right to go to a grocery store and purchase what you buy in a grocery store without knowing that somebody knows what you're buying. Mr. President, I intend to shortly introduce legislation which will call for a comprehensive review of data collection by public and private entities and the impact that that data is having on the American people. I don't know if this is a progressive piece of legislation or a conservative piece of legislation, but I would hope that this have broad support across the political spectrum from people who actually do believe in a free society, that our young people should not be worried about the kinds of books they read or the websites that they visit. Mr. President, we must bring together leaders in the technology world, people who not only know what technology today is doing in invading our privacy rights, but what the future holds, because I am quite certain that every single day this technology is growing more and more sophisticated and more intrusive. And sitting down with people who are experts on technology, we have got to have civil libertarians, people who understand what the First Amendment is, what the Fourth Amendment is, what our Bill of Rights is about, what our Constitution is about. And of course, involved in that discussion must be law enforcement and our security experts. And the goal of all of this must be to create legislation which does everything that we can to protect the safety of the American people, but also protects our privacy rights and our constitutional rights. So, Mr. President, with that, I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle on that legislation. And with that, I would yield the floor.